The studio lights were bright and hot, making the air feel heavier than it should. Cameras stood like silent guards, their red lights blinking, waiting for the moment to capture everything. The audience was already buzzing, a mix of excitement and tension because tonight's live TV show had promised unfiltered, controversial, and raw conversation. At the center of the stage sat Whoopi Goldberg, leaning forward in her chair, her eyes sharp and full of challenge. Across from her sat Keanu Reeves, dressed simply in a black shirt and jeans, his long hair falling slightly into his face. Looked calm, almost too calm, as if he knew something no one else did. The topic of the night had started as Hollywood's influence on faith and morals. But as the cameras rolled, Whoopi's tone shifted. She tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and suddenly asked a question no one expected. "Keanu," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "you've been accused of avoiding any talk about Jesus. Some even say you hate him. Is that true?" The crowd reacted immediately. Few gasped, some whispered, others leaned forward in their seats. The control room cameras zoomed in on Keanu's face, hoping to catch any sign of discomfort. But instead of flinching, he just stared back at her, silent for a moment. Inside, Keanu felt the weight of the words. They were not just a question. They were an accusation. And the way she had said it was designed to push him into a corner. He could already sense the energy in the room change, like a storm building. Part of him knew he could give a short answer and move on. But another part of him, the deeper part, knew this was bigger than defending himself. This was about showing what respect, humility, truth really looked like under pressure. Before answering, Keanu thought of his mother, a gentle woman who had always told him never to react in anger. He thought of the people he had met on movie sets, on the streets, and in quiet corners of life, people who carried invisible battles, who didn't need more judgment in the world. He thought of the fact that his own beliefs were deeply personal, shaped not by fame, but by loss, love, and the small, unspoken miracles of everyday life. "Whoopi," he said finally, his voice low but clear, "I don't hate Jesus. I could never hate someone who stands for love, kindness, and forgiveness. But I also believe that faith is not something to shout from a stage just to prove a point. It's something you live quietly in the way you treat people, especially when no one is watching." His words hung in the air. The audience went silent, sensing the honesty in his tone. But Whoopi wasn't ready to let it go. She leaned in. Further, her eyes narrowing. "But people say your silence means you're ashamed. Isn't that the same as rejecting him?" Keanu took a deep breath. The air in the studio felt heavier now, and even the cameramen seemed to be holding their breath. He could feel the trap tightening. If he defended himself too hard, it would look like he was desperate to prove something. If he stayed quiet, the audience might believe her version of the truth. He smiled faintly, almost sadly, and said, "Silence can mean many things, Whoopi. Sometimes it's respect, sometimes it's humility, and sometimes it's just choosing not to turn something sacred into entertainment. I've lost people I love, sat beside hospital beds not knowing if the person I cared about would see another day. In those moments, I didn't need to post anything. I didn't need to make a statement. I just needed to be there to hold their hand." Faith is like that. The audience shifted in their seats. Some nodded slowly, as if his words had reached them in a place they didn't expect. One woman in the front row even wiped her eyes, but before the tension could ease, Whoopi pressed. Again, her voice sharper this time. "So are you saying people who speak openly about their faith are wrong?" Keanu shook his head, still calm. "No, I'm saying that everyone has their own way. Some shout it from rooftops. Some whisper it in prayers before sleep. Some show it only in how they treat strangers. My way is my way. And it's okay if it's not yours." For a moment, the studio was utterly silent. No coughs, no shifting chairs, no whispered side comments. And in that silence, Keanu could feel the balance of the room begin to change. The challenge had been thrown, and he had caught it without anger, without pride, without the need to crush the other person. Instead, he had answered with something that made people think. And that was far more powerful than any argument. What no one knew yet was that this conversation would take a turn no one saw coming. Because while the world would soon argue about his words online, something else, something deeply personal and shocking, was about to surface during this very interview, live on air. And when it did, the entire room would be shaken to its core. Asterisk the pause after Keanu's last words felt like a stretch of open space, wide enough for the whole studio to fall into. Whoopi sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable, but her eyes still sharp. The audience was holding on to the moment, wondering if she would push further or let it drop. The producers in the control room were whispering to each other, deciding whether to cut to a commercial break. But before they could make the call, a man from the side of the stage began moving toward the set. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit, his steps urgent but controlled. A headset curled around his ear and he carried a folded paper in his hand. The cameras caught the movement, zooming in slightly. The audience murmured. It was unusual for anyone to interrupt a live segment like this, which meant something important had just happened. Whoopi turned, frowning. "What is it?" The man leaned close to her, whispering something the microphones couldn't catch. Her eyes widened slightly, and she glanced at Keanu. For a split second, something flickered in her expression, not challenge this time, but hesitation. The man stepped back, turning to leave, but Keanu's calm voice stopped him. "If it's about me," he said, "you can say it here." The studio went still again. Even the audience seemed to stop breathing. The man hesitated, looking to the producer for a signal. When the producer gave a small nod, he unfolded the paper and spoke. "Mr. Reeves, there's been a post circulating online in the last 10 minutes. Someone shared an old letter you wrote. A private letter from almost 20 years ago. It's already going viral." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. "What letter?" The man hesitated again. "A letter to a young fan. She was in the hospital." Keanu's eyes softened, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Her name was Anna," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," the man replied. "And the letter talks about Jesus." Gasps rippled through the audience. Whoopi straightened in her seat, suddenly more curious than confrontational. "What does it say?" she asked. The man glanced at the producer again, who gave a reluctant nod. "It says," the man read, "Dear Anna, I don't know why life can be so hard sometimes, but I do know that love is real. I believe Jesus showed us that by how he lived, not just by what he said. He loved the people no one else would touch, forgave the ones no one else could forgive. If you believe in him, hold on to that love. If you don't, then still hold on to love, because it's the same light." The room was silent, and no one moved. Whoopi's eyes had softened, her hands folded together. Keanu sat quietly, his face unreadable, but there was a heaviness in his eyes. "Anna was 12, he said after a long pause. "She had a rare illness. I visited her once. She told me she wasn't afraid of dying, but she was afraid of being forgotten, so I promised her I'd never forget. I wrote that letter the night before her surgery. She didn't make it through." The weight of his words hung in the air. The audience wasn't just listening anymore, they were feeling it. Deep in their chests, Whoopi spoke again, but her voice was gentler now. "And you never talked about this? Why?" Keanu looked at her, then at the audience. "Because it wasn't about me. It was about her. And sometimes, the most important things we do in life aren't meant to be on camera. They're meant to stay in the heart." A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man in the back crossed his arms, his jaw tight, as if holding back emotion. But just as the atmosphere began to soften, a voice came from the far corner of the studio. It was one of the camera operators speaking into his headset, unaware his microphone had been left on. "There's more," he said to someone on the other end. "There's a second letter. And it's not just about the girl. It's about someone else Keanu's never spoken about publicly." Heads turned. The tension in the air shifted again. Keanu's calm eyes met the camera, and for the first time all night, there was something else in them, a shadow of pain, and maybe a truth he had kept buried for years. The air in the studio seemed to thicken after the camera operator's words slipped out. Every person in the room knew they had just stepped into a moment no one had planned for. The producers in the control room were signaling frantically, unsure whether to cut to a commercial or let the tension keep building. The audience leaned forward, as if drawn by an invisible pull. Whoopi's eyes darted toward Keanu, and for the first time since the interview began, there was no challenge in her face, only curiosity mixed with caution. "Keanu," she said softly, "do you know what they're talking about?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the floor for a moment. His fingers lightly tapped against his leg. "Yes!" he said finally. "It is." The man with the headset reappeared from the side of the stage, holding a second folded paper. He seemed reluctant to walk forward, as if he knew the weight of what he carried. He handed it to Whoopi without speaking. She unfolded it. Slowly, her eyes scanning the words, her expression changed, not dramatically, but in a way that made the audience notice. She looked at Keanu again. "You want me to read this?" "You can," he said quietly. "But please understand, I wrote this at the lowest point in my life." She nodded, then began to read. "Dear M, I don't know if you will ever read this, but I need to put it somewhere, even if it's just in the wind. You left without warning, and the world has felt emptier every day since. I've been angry at you, at God, even at Jesus. I keep asking why he would take someone who loved so deeply, who gave so much, when there are people out there who do nothing but hurt others. I don't have answers. But I do know that if Jesus is real, and I believe he is, then he is holding you now in a way I never could. I hope you feel my love from here. I hope you know you are my home." By the time she reached the last line, the audience was completely silent. Few people had tears in their eyes. Whoopi set the paper down gently. "Who was M?" she asked. Keanu swallowed hard, his voice low. "M was Michelle. She was the woman I was going to marry." He paused, his eyes distant. "We lost her in a car accident before the wedding. It happened late at night, when she was driving back from visiting her sister. I never got to say goodbye." A ripple of emotion moved through the audience. Even those who didn't know him personally could feel the heaviness of his loss. Whoopi spoke softly now, her earlier edge completely gone. "So when people accuse you of hating Jesus," Keanu gave a faint, bittersweet smile, "they don't know the whole story. I've been angry with him. Yes. I've questioned him. But hate, no? You can't hate someone you keep turning to, even when you're hurting." The producers in the control room whispered urgently. The live feed was picking up a surge of engagement online. Hashtags with Keanu's name were trending within minutes. Thousands of comments were flooding in, people sharing their own stories of faith, loss, and unanswered questions. But before the interview could move forward, a member of the audience stood up. She was young, maybe in her 20s, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Mr. Reeves, Michelle was my aunt." The entire studio froze. Keanu's eyes widened slightly, searching her face. "I've never met you." "What?" the young woman continued. "But my mom told me about you. She said you were the only person who visited Michelle's grave every year. I wanted you to know. Your family never blamed you. We always hoped we'd meet you one day to tell you that." Keanu's eyes glistened, and for a moment, he couldn't speak, stood slowly walking toward her, the cameras following every step. When he reached her, he didn't say anything, he just hugged her. The kind of hug that carried years of unspoken pain and quiet respect. As they stood there, the studio knew they weren't just watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing something real, raw, and deeply human, the kind of moment that would echo far beyond the walls of the set. But what no one realized yet is that the young woman hadn't told the whole story, and the truth she was about to reveal next would change the entire direction of the night. Asterisk. Keanu slowly stepped back from the young woman, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. The audience was still silent, but the air was charged with the kind of stillness that only happens when everyone knows something important is about to be said. The young woman took a shaky breath, glancing briefly at Whoopi, then back at Keanu. "There's something I think you should know," she said quietly, her voice almost trembling. "Something my mom never told you, but Michelle knew." Keanu's expression softened, but his eyes searched hers with quiet intensity. "What is it?" The young woman hesitated, her fingers twisting together. "The night of the accident. Michelle wasn't just coming back from her sister's house. She was on her way to see you. She had a letter for you. It was in her bag." When they found her car, Keanu's breath caught. His heart began to pound, the words sinking in like stones dropping into deep water. "A letter?" She nodded. "My mom kept it all these years because she didn't know if it would hurt you more or help you. But I think you deserve to read it now." A ripple of surprise swept through the audience. The producers in the control room were whispering urgently, sensing the moment's gravity. One of them gestured to a stagehand, who hurried forward, carrying a small, sealed envelope. The envelope was old, its paper yellowed slightly at the edges. Across the front, in neat handwriting, was his name, Keanu. He took it with trembling fingers. For a long moment, he just stared at it, his thumb brushing over the familiar loops of her handwriting. Finally, with a deep breath, he carefully opened it. The sound of the paper tearing seemed loud in the silent room. His eyes scanned the first lines, and the world seemed to fall away, "My love." The letter began. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't wait until tomorrow to tell you how much I love you. I don't know what our future will look like, but I know that every moment with you has been the most beautiful part of my life. You once told me you didn't know if you believed in happy endings, but I do, because I found mine the day I met you. And if for some reason I don't make it to tomorrow, please promise me one thing: don't close your heart. Jesus taught us to keep loving even when it hurts. I hope you'll keep loving, Keanu, because that's the part of you I fell in love with most." Keanu's hands trembled slightly as he reached the end. His lips parted, but no words came out. The young woman's voice was gentle when she spoke again. She carried that letter with her everywhere that week. "Mom, she was going to give it to you after dinner that night?" Whoopi, visibly moved, leaned forward. "What do you want to say to her if she could hear you right now?" Keanu swallowed hard, his voice low and heavy. "I'd tell her I never stopped loving her. I'd tell her she was wrong about one thing. I didn't just find my happy ending when I met her. I've been carrying it with me all this time. Just hurts too much to take it out and look at it." The audience sat in quiet awe. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others simply stared, caught in the rawness of the moment. But before anyone could speak again, the young woman took a small step closer. "There's one more thing," she said. "Michelle's faith changed my mom's life. And when she passed, my mom said you kept visiting the grave every year on the same date. Do you know why?" Keanu looked at her, his brow furrowed slightly. "It was the day we met." She shook her head gently. "No, it was also her baptism." The room went utterly still. Keanu blinked, his mind replaying memories he hadn't connected before. Michelle had never told him, and then the young woman's voice trembled with emotion. She said, "You were the first person who ever made her believe God still sent good people into the world." Keanu's jaw tightened, and his eyes glistened again. The audience could see him struggling to hold back the tide of emotion. But just as he was about to respond, one of the producers whispered something urgently into Whoopi's earpiece. Her eyes widened and she looked at Keanu. "We just got word," she said slowly. "Someone is on their way here who says they knew Michelle, and that they have something of hers you've never seen before." The studio air felt charged, almost electric. Keanu sat still, his hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the floor as the weight of what had just happened settled in. The audience whispered among themselves, each person wondering who could possibly be on their way with something that belonged to Michelle. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, glancing toward the stage entrance every few seconds, clearly aware that the show had turned into something far deeper than any scripted segment. A few minutes later, the heavy studio doors opened. A man stepped inside mid-40s, wearing a worn leather jacket, his dark hair flecked with gray. He looked a little out of place under the bright lights, like someone who had spent more time on the road than in a television studio. In his hands, he carried a small wooden box, polished but clearly old. The producers guided him toward the stage. The audience fell into silence again, their curiosity peaking. When he reached the center, He stopped a few feet from Keanu and looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You don't know me," the man said, his voice steady but quiet. "My name's Daniel. I used to play guitar in the same church band as Michelle. We were close friends back then. After she passed, her mother gave me something and asked me to hold on to it until I felt the right time to give it to you." Keanu's gaze lifted to meet his. "And this is the right time." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've watched you over the years, never once trying to profit from her memory, never twisting her story for attention. You kept her dignity intact. I think she would want you to have this now." He stepped forward and handed Keanu the wooden box. It was light, but solid, with a small brass latch on the front. Keanu hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a simple silver cross on a thin chain, slightly tarnished but still beautiful. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Keanu reached for the paper first. As he unfolded it, his eyes scanned the familiar handwriting. "Keanu," it began, "if I ever leave this world before you, I want you to have this cross. It was given to me by my grandmother when I was a child. She told me it wasn't just jewelry, it was a reminder to love without fear. If you're reading this, it means we didn't get to live all the days we planned. But I want you to keep loving, even when it feels impossible. I want you to believe that God still has a purpose for you. And if you ever start to doubt that, just wear this cross for one day and remember that someone believed in you with all their heart." Keanu's hands trembled slightly as he set the letter down and picked up the cross. The chain slid through his fingers like water. For a long moment, he just stared at it, his jaw tight, his breathing unsteady. Daniel cleared his throat. She wore that every Sunday, never took it off unless she was sleeping. The night before the accident, she asked me to polish it for her. Said she wanted it to look perfect. The audience's eyes followed Keanu as he slowly closed his hand around the cross. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic flourish, just a quiet, deep stillness that somehow carried more power than any speech. Whoopi spoke softly. "Keanu, will you wear it?" He looked up, his voice low but steady. "Yes, but not for the cameras. Not for the show. I'll wear it because she asked me to, because she believed I still had more to give." The audience erupted into quiet applause. Not loud and wild, but respectful, almost reverent. Some people wiped tears from their cheeks. Daniel placed a hand on Keanu's shoulder. "There's one last thing," he said. "Her mother told me. Michelle wrote one more letter, but she didn't want it opened until the person reading it had truly forgiven themselves." Keanu froze, his fingers still wrapped around the cross. "And where is it now?" Daniel hesitated, then looked directly into his eyes. "It's with her mother, and she's here, waiting backstage." The audience erupted into quiet gasps at Daniel's words. Keanu's head turned slowly toward the side of the stage, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he needed to steady himself before seeing. "Who waited there?" Whoopi leaned forward, her voice softer now than it had been all night. "Do you want her to come out?" Keanu didn't answer right away. His thumb brushed over the silver cross in his hand, feeling the cool metal press into his skin. Then he nodded once. "Yes, I think it's time." The stage curtain shifted, and an elderly woman stepped forward. Her hair was silver and pulled into a neat bun, and though her movements were slow, there was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself. She wore a pale blue dress and held a small sealed envelope in her hands. The studio audience rose instinctively. To their feet, some in respect, some in sheer anticipation. Keanu stood too, his eyes fixed on her. She stopped a few feet away and looked up at him. "It's been a long time," she said softly. Keanu's single quotes his voice caught. Too long, for a moment, just looking at each other, two people. Bound by the same loss, but separated by years of silence. Finally, she extended the envelope toward him. "Michelle wrote this the night she told me she was going to marry you. She gave it to me in case something happened to her. I couldn't bring myself to give it to you until I knew you were ready to forgive yourself for what happened." His fingers closed around the envelope, the paper soft and worn from years of being held. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted quietly. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. You are. You've carried her memory with love, not bitterness. You've honored her life in ways the world doesn't even know about. That's what ready looks like. Yana took a deep breath and carefully tore the seal. The paper inside was thin, her handwriting flowing across it in familiar loops. My dearest Keanu, began. If you're reading this, then somehow life has taken a turn we never wanted. I need you to know none of it is your fault. The night I met you, I saw the kindest man I'd ever known. You've carried more pain than most people will in a lifetime, and still you give. Still you love. That's why I chose you. If I can't be there to walk beside you, then promise me this. Keep walking anyway. Help someone who feels invisible. Forgive someone who hurt you. And when you doubt yourself, remember this truth. I believed in you, and I still do. Keanu's hands lowered the letter slowly. His jaw tightened, his lips pressing together as he fought the emotion rising in his chest. The audience sat motionless, every eye locked on him. Finally, he looked. At Michelle's mother, I'll keep walking, he said softly. And I'll make sure her belief in me wasn't wasted. Ow. She stepped forward, and he embraced her. Ow. It wasn't the polite hug of strangers. It was the deep, aching embrace of two people finally allowing themselves to share the grief they had carried. Alone. The applause that followed was unlike any the show had ever seen. It wasn't just for Keanu. It was for the reminder that even the deepest wounds could carry seeds of light. When they finally pulled apart, Keanu returned to his seat. He still held the silver cross in one hand and the letter in the other. The camera zoomed in on his face as he looked into the audience and then directly into the lens. People will tell you faith is about rules or speeches, he said quietly. But sometimes it's just about not giving up on love, even when it hurts. The studio fell into a hush, a silence filled not with emptiness, but with the weight of something real. The red camera light blinked, and somewhere in the control room, a producer mouthed, "We've got it. This is the moment." And for millions watching at home, they didn't just see an actor on a talk show, they saw a man carrying the quiet proof that love, forgiveness, and faith could survive even the hardest storms.